down. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is I want to show you how you can do some simple analysis by using Excel. And so I've created a data set based on a test, and here you can see this is the test score, but then I've broken it down by the sections of the test. So I want to look at the test itself, maybe analyze some of the items, but then also want to look at breakpoints in the data from the students so that I can do future differentiation. So first thing I want to do is I want to sort the data by looking at my scores. And so I'm going to select my students, and I want to custom sort. So I click on the sort, which is on the home button, and then I click on custom sort, and then it's going to come up with a which column I want to sort by. And for the first analysis, I want to sort by column B, which is my overall score. I'm also going to click that my data has headers because it's going to take into account that I have put in the type of item that's there, and then I click OK. And actually, because I put the maximum number for each one, it is going to put that in there as well. Okay, so from here I can see that I've got 8 students who failed the test. So I'm going to go ahead and color code that for myself. And actually maybe I'm going to put them in red because they are definitely at risk. And then I've got another group that made a C on the test. And then I've got a large group of students who made a B on the test. And then I've got a very small group of students who made an A. So one thing that I would want to look at is the test a mismatch for the students? Because if I have this number of students making an A, I want to think about, are my expectations where they need to be? So that's one type of analysis. All right, so we can then take our data and let's just copy that into a second sheet so that I can do a different type of analysis. The first one I'm gonna name by grade. So I've kind of broken them into groups by grade. Now, if I take a second and look at this, like if I wanted to do a differentiation, this could easily be broken into groups. 2 groups of 4, this group, 2 groups of 4. Here I've got another 2 groups of 4, and then I've got a final group of 4. So actually, I've got the means to create some centers or differentiation based on their test score. Alright, the second thing that I want to look at is the test itself. So for this, I'm going to clear out my color coding because now I want to look at the individual parts of the test. So one thing that you always want to eyeball is anything where you have most students doing really well or most students doing really poorly. And if I just eyeball this data, then I can tell that my reading has some really low scores. So one thing that you might consider doing is to take the data from your reading and compare it to the overall score on the test. So let's do let's look at that, and I can do a bar chart. Let me just pull this into a smaller window. So let's see. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's do a chart, and I want to see these two data sets side by side. I'm going to pull up a line chart for this one because it kind of helps me see where these are correlating. So the first thing I'm seeing is that everybody is doing really poorly on that reading section, and it doesn't seem to be very predictive of the overall score. So I might need to look at that section and see if maybe the questions are too hard, or maybe if the questions are confusing, or maybe what's happened is that I haven't really prepared the students for that section. Maybe they haven't had enough practice. So let's look at a different set of data. If I'm eyeballing, another thing that I can see is that the students in their vocabulary section seem to be doing awfully well. That seems to be a really easy section. And my listening section seems to be extremely consistent. So again, let's just do a little bit of a data analysis. Let's insert maybe a columns chart and just look at it and see how they compare. So you can see right there that my series 2 is my listening. It doesn't really seem to correlate much to the overall score. So maybe in that section my questions are too simple, and I might need to, make some adjustments. And then let's look at my easiest section, which I think might be my vocabulary section, and then let's compare it to how those same students did on their reading section. Move that chart over there. And let's graph it. Let's see how those correlate. Okay, now interestingly, they seem to have some points of a basic trend towards the top, but then I have some students who were doing really well, who then were not doing at all well on my reading section. So from looking at this data, I think I definitely want to make sure that I review the questions for the reading section and the listening section, and maybe I want to review the types of questions that I have for the vocabulary section as well. Alright, a second thing that I can do is looking at an individual student. So let's look at our top student in this section and find out where they struggled the most. And if my top grades did not do well in my reading, then that tells me a lot as well. So these are just to give you some ideas of the type of data analysis you might do in looking at individual scores. Now, one other thing that's easy to do to compute is to take the average of each of these columns. So let's start with an equals mark and average, and then look at my data set. So I'm going to be looking at B. My column is B, and I start on 2. So B2 all the way to B29, and that's going to average that for me, and I press enter. So I had an average of a 76, but we also want to look at the rest of it. Anytime that you have a formula inputted into your Excel worksheet, you can navigate to the corner of your cell where you see the black cross, and then you can pull it across and have the exact same formula applied to a different data set. But of course, this is not very meaningful unless I put it in terms of the percentage score. So for these, I need to do one more formula. I need to take my average and I need to divide it by the number of possible points. So for the first one, that would be the contents of C31 divided by 15 possible points. And of course, to make it look a little bit more similar to my test, I might actually want to multiply that by 100 so that it looks like a percentage. Let's do that. Okay, so then let's pull that whole thing across. Actually, we can't do that, never mind, because if we pull that whole thing across, I'm going to have to change the numbers of the points, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and pull it across, and then I'll just change the number that I'm dividing by. So there's 20 possible points for that, and then for this one, it was 20 possible points, and then for this one it was 15, and then finally for this one it was 30. Okay, so actually this is really interesting. I'm just putting this here because because I want to be able to see the data. So your average score is a 76, but look, almost everybody made an A. There's an average of a 93 on the listening section. That's way easy. That was pretty easy too. This one was mid-range, but this was so difficult for the class. Like, we need to probably throw out some of those questions. This looks to be more similar to the overall average, but this test may need some revision. Alright, so I hope that you now have some ideas about how to use Excel to inform your reflection on data. And now your job is to collect some data from a class or from multiple classes and reflect on either what the test is telling you, what groups you can ascertain for the purposes of differentiation in the future, or what modifications might need to be made, or what you need to do in order to address how students performed on the assessment.